Hi, everyone. This is Dr. Cheryl Selman, and welcome to the Love Code. We're talking about opportunities to expand our hearts, our consciousness, to connect us more to all of life. And today is a wonderful conversation with a New York Times best-selling author, Nick Trout, and his new book that's just been released. And before I go into this really great opportunity to have a profound conversation, I first of all want to welcome everyone who may be listening to the Love Code for the first time. Thank you for joining me. I invite you to go to my website, which is drcherylselman.com, because once you opt in there, I will be able to send you every show that I put out, every important bit of information and studies and articles and things that I deem of relevance that go right to your inbox. So if you opt into drcherylselman.com, you will be sure to get in on everything going on. And also my Facebook page, which is What Women Must Know, is another place to go where I post all of the shows, not only for the Love Code, but for the other show I host on Progressive Radio Network, which is called What Women Must Know. And again, it's a place that you'll be able to see the shows, get the archive shows, and all sorts of other things that I post on a daily basis to keep you up to date, to keep you empowered, to keep you able to make the best choices for your health and well-being. So, having said that, let's get into this conversation because it's a truly a fascinating conversation with a very renowned author, veterinarian surgeon, and let me just tell you a little bit about Nick Trout. He's a staff surgeon at the prestigious Angell Animal Medical Center in Boston. He's also the author of 5 books, including the New York Times best-selling memoir, Tell Me Where It Hurts. And he lives in Massachusetts with his wife, Kathy, and their adopted Labradoodle, Ty. And he is also the author of this his latest book, which has just been released, called The Wonder of Lost Causes. And it's a very compelling book. I started reading it. I haven't finished it yet, but we're going to learn all about Nick and his book and his life as a veterinary surgeon and the particular relevance of his new book, The Wonder of Lost Causes, and his own personal journey. So, Nick, welcome to the show today.
Hi, Cheryl. Thanks so much for having me on your show.
Well, you're so welcome, and congratulations for another fantastic book. I know that it will be another award-winning book, and it's always a pleasure to have people who are doing such amazing writing and touching the lives and the hearts of people around the world. So, again, congratulations. Nick, let's talk a bit about you and your journey, because you started out and still are a veterinary surgeon, and your path has taken you to some interesting places. So tell us a bit about how your journey unfolded in life.
Yes. I was embarrassed to note that I've actually been a veterinarian for 30 years next month, which is a little scary because I still think I'm pretty young, but I guess not.
I totally understand.
I went to veterinary school in England. I was born in England. I've lived in England for about half of my life. And once I graduated veterinary school, I said to myself, I feel like I want to specialize in small animal surgery, surgery predominantly for cats and dogs. And at the time, the European system and British system of veterinary training was such that it was actually lagging behind what was going on in the United States by maybe a decade or two, just in terms of the way education systems train veterinarians once they graduate vet school. And I used to do a lot of traveling when I was a student. I actually, for the first time, came to the States in 1988 and spent some time at the University of Pennsylvania. And I said, I kind of like this country. I like the way they do veterinary medicine. I like, even though I'm from the land of dog lovers, supposedly, I like the way the Americans demonstrate their enthusiasm and love for their animals. And I was fortunate to get into a training program at Tufts University, and in part, that training program was also here in Boston at Angell. And at the time, they were two very contrasting experiences in that there was a much more methodical, curious, mysterious caseload to the animals that I would see out in an academic environment at Tufts University, whereas Angell was very much, downtown, inner city, lots of trauma, gunshot injuries, lots of, just a very sort of street smart environment. That has changed dramatically. Now Angell sits, having not moved, but gentrification has occurred, and it's a very ritzy area, and I only wish I'd bought some real estate back then. It was great training because I got the best of both worlds, and so I got through that training. I took all my various examinations and was fortunate to be one of the early surgeons who was both board certified in the United States and also across Europe as well. And I sort of went on that surgical path for a while and wrote articles and edited textbooks and wrote chapters in textbooks. But I started to realize over time that there were a lot of stories that were sort of walking through my door that had this, mystery, heartwarming, heart-wrenching, humor, pathos, or, just the whole gamut of what a writer is looking for. I have to confess, I stopped my formal education in English literature and language at the age of 16. I never did any further formal training beyond 16 years of age. And maybe my editor would be able to share why, because she bears the brunt of that, that she could say, oh, I see why that is. And so writing is not something that I would naturally gravitate to, but the material was always there. And so somewhere around 2004, I started thinking about writing, and I actually wrote a book proposal and got an agent and went down to New York and met with multiple publishers, and none of them ultimately decided this was right for them. And then this little book called Marley and Me came along, and suddenly I was popular. And I was able to find an editor. Christine Pride was my first editor, and then that book went on to become a bestseller. So I had that experience of massive rejection. I couldn't even get it accepted into a small university press, and some 6 months later, I was able to get it bought by Random House. So I discovered very early on that publishing is an extremely fickle industry, and that really hasn't changed that much for me to today.
Well, your fate unfolded, it seems.
Yeah, they talk about if you want to get into writing, you've got to face rejection. I mean, I couldn't get an agent for years, and ultimately I got an agent, and then I couldn't get a publisher for years. And then when you finally get a book published, you worry that, okay, you think it's great, but does the rest of the world think it's great? And will they enjoy it? Will the folks who read this do the ultimate thing of saying, I feel like I've learned something here. This has changed my outlook. This is, it's not, I don't need big numbers. I'm just trying to connect with anyone who's open to reading the books, and to make it feel like that was a worthwhile project, particularly when these projects can be years in the making.
I totally understand. As an author myself, I elected to go the self-publishing route, which is a whole different world, which can be very successful, as it was in my case, or, it leaves you out there in the cold. But the thing is, you have a message. You have something that is brewing inside you, some creative energy that is moving you to express and bring into the world something that is important for your soul.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a compulsion to it and an addiction to the writing process and the feeling the need to keep going regardless of whether someone is actually going to be on the receiving end of it or not. And there's a great satisfaction of coming to the end of that project and feeling it's a good job done. I actually confess that I'm awful once I've written a manuscript, because I kind of think, okay, that's done and now I can walk away from it. And in truth, when it comes to the whole editorial process, I haven't even started, and I'm constantly looking at, okay, that worked, and let's go on to the next project, where really I have to try and keep my head down and focus on making this as good as it possibly could be.
Well, you obviously have succeeded at doing that. I want to ask you, as a veterinary surgeon, it's a fascinating field, because I look around at my friends. I do not have a dog. I travel a lot, so it's just not the right time for me to have a dog. But if I weren't traveling, I would definitely find a companion. But I have many friends who do, and I have relationships with their dogs. But the state of veterinary surgery is so interesting. I mean, there was a woman in the building that I live in whose dog had cataract surgeries. I mean, they're doing things in the world of surgery with dogs and probably cats and maybe other animals that never existed before. And it's, I don't know, it's kind of a two-edged sword, whether we are moving in a direction that is really humane to these animals, or are we kind of satisfying the need for their owners to keep their pets alive. What are some of the advances, and what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, there's no end of things that we're capable of doing for our pets now, with stem cell therapies and anti-cancer vaccines and prosthetic limbs and artificial joints and pacemakers, valve replacement, all pretty much, kidney transplants. If you can think about it in our own healthcare, it's potentially applicable to what we can do with animals. The big question I think you're getting to there is, just because we can, should we? And that's a tough call. I think this leads to very intense discussions with owners about how far we should go. Is this reasonable? And I do think that the owners in general are receptive to these kinds of hard conversations, that they do want to do best by their animal. They don't want to make this a selfish process. There are times when I do think, and I've certainly aired this to clients, where I've said, I'm just not comfortable with doing a procedure where other more serious illnesses are going on, and I don't see that this is reasonable. There's got to be, for me, enough upside to a surgery. We think of animals are stuck in the now, that they are living in the present. They don't have the ability to look at a short-term period of discomfort like we would say, let's say we're being treated for cancer, we will go through a rounds of chemotherapy knowing that this is going to have a good chance of benefiting us. And we've made that decision ourselves. Dogs are just going to be on the other end of these treatments. And so we as pet owners have that huge responsibility of saying, I'm good with this, I'm comfortable with this, because I can see enough daylight on the far side to make this a reasonable thing to do for my animal. But those discussions are going to become increasingly difficult and frequent because we have so much available now, and owners ask about it, they know about it, they want it, or at least they want to entertain the notion of whether this is something that they should do for their animal and to keep their animal in their lives.
As you were saying, I'm sure there's just about nothing that can't be done on animals that are being done on humans now. But the cost is prohibitive. I mean, what people are paying to have these procedures, and are they doing it because, it's really benefiting their animal? They're doing it because of their own fear of loss and death and dealing with grief and, just the emotions that come up with an animal that is an animal and going through a crisis or aging. I think it's an interesting moral dilemma that we're facing right now.
It is an interesting dilemma. I mean, veterinary medicine is expensive. We are very aware of our own health costs, and if we don't or unfortunate enough to have problems with health insurance, if you ever look at the price you're paying for fairly, a simple visit to the emergency room that is doesn't require anything surgical, out-of-cost expenses could be phenomenal. And medicine costs a lot of money, and that is going to become another huge challenge going forward, not least because, it's going to come to a point where someone will say, what are my options? And I could be faced with saying, okay, well, this is the sort of coach option, this is the business class, and this is the first class. And so do you want okay, or do you want excellent? And people having to choose between those options where, you and I could never perceive a situation where we go to our doctor and they go, do you want okay or do you want great? We always want great. And that challenge and that moral dilemma will be omnipresent and getting worse over the next couple of decades because, medicine isn't slowing down. The genie is out of the bottle. And as such, we're constantly, pet owners want to do the best for their animals. They perceive, and in many cases will be very verbal about saying, this pet is my child, and as such gets that sort of status in the family, and that's something that, again, puts a different pressure on the modern veterinarian. The modern veterinarian is having to become no less of a central character as the modern pediatrician is to a family.
What do you think drives people's perception of their animals as their child? I mean, it couldn't have always been this way. Pets have always been part of people's families, but people know when they get a dog, the dog has a limited lifespan that will probably she'll probably go before you do. That's accepted if you have an animal. But suddenly seems that people, not we, but people seem to want to keep their dogs or pets alive as long as possible.
Yeah, I think some of that is a reflection of today's society, that if you look at the way we live our lives, we are just charging around, racing around. We are, this anonymous, fast-paced society. We don't engage with one another. We don't know our neighbors. We are, constantly, standing in line, and we'd rather look at our cell phone or put earbuds in our ears and keep our head down and just listen to music rather than engage our fellow man. And that's where animals have come into our lives. I think this emotional aspect of connectivity is missing in society and for some people, and as a result of which, we've embraced a cat, a dog, a rabbit, whatever it may be, and those animals will slow us down. They'll distill our lives into those moments that matter, the emotions that matter. We'll share these unspoken times. We just stop and have this time with an animal, which we desperately need. There's that connection, and it doesn't require words. And we feel it, and I think because of the way society is, we're even more receptive than we've ever been to it, and that kind of that need from us has been filled by these animals in a way that is safe. We know these animals aren't going to gossip about us. There's no backstabbing. There's no bad hair days. There's no, does this haircut make my backside look fat? The animals are void of these foibles, and we know that if we share a secret, it will be absolutely kept. I said at one point in one book, the difference is that animals offers love without the risk, and that's highly desirable in today's society.
I just saw a headline today that said 1 in 4 Americans have no one to confide in.
Yeah.
Isn't that an interesting statistic?
Yeah, that is, and that's sort of to the point that, I wonder if they've also said, does that 1 in 4 have a pet?
Right. Highly probable.
Yeah.
For the reasons you're sharing, it's another being that is there for you unconditionally. Unconditional. Well, at least dogs are unconditional. I don't know if cats are unconditional, but I'm more of a dog person than a cat person. I also want to ask you, what do we know about the emotional lives of animals these days? What do we know about dogs? What goes on in dogs' minds? Do we really know how to communicate and develop a real relationship with these beings? Who are they?
Well, that's a really tough question because I have not worked it out. All I know is that my relationship with my own dog is such that we will stare into each other's eyes and something is happening between us because I can feel it from her. She can feel it from me, and it feels good. It's just this calmness, this comfort, this security, and I feel as though it goes both ways now. I'm certainly no canine psychotherapist or pet psychic, but my sort of fundamental response to that is whatever it is, I find a great deal of pleasure and joy from it, and it's all good.
I have a friend who is somewhat in communication with dogs, and it turns out they're really funny. They have a funny sense of humor, according to her. The things that they say to her, it just cracks me up when she tells me the things that this one dog says to her. They're really funny animals. It'd be interesting to read their thoughts more often, It
was interesting the point you made about embracing these animals as children. And that this does, these pet owners do take on these animals knowing that they will face the loss of that animal in their own lifetime. And that does go against the natural order of things. One of the reasons for writing this book was that just one of the central characters in the book has the incurable disease cystic fibrosis, which is a disease that causes predominantly, but not exclusively, chronic lung problems, breathing problems, infections, and shortens natural lifespan. And that is cystic fibrosis is the number one genetic killer of children and young adults in the United States, affecting about 30,000 kids, in fact. May is CF Awareness Month. But one of the things that is important about that is that my daughter has cystic fibrosis. I was an unwitting carrier of a mutated gene, so was my wife, and we had a 1 in 4 chance unknowingly of having a child with CF. Now, because I have this child who has the potential for a much shortened lifespan, that sort of comes into play with what I face professionally with pet owners who know that their animal, relative to them, has a shortened lifespan. And so, unwittingly, over the last 26 years, the awareness of what I face with my own child has impacted the way I relate to and how I deal with clients who are also facing that sort of permanent state of anticipatory grief, particularly as their pet reaches the latter years of life.
So let's explore that a bit more, because in your new book, The Wonder of Lost Causes, as you said, the main character has cystic fibrosis. Your daughter was born with cystic fibrosis. Did you intentionally want to write a book that dealt with this issue?
Absolutely, yeah. I wanted to, some of this came about, first of all, wanting to do that. The story in the book goes between a young, 11-year-old boy with CF and his single mother. I wanted to capture the parental aspect, parenting a child with a chronic disease, and to get across some of the challenges, the frustrations, the fears that mother has of trying to keep a day job as well as trying to keep a child alive. But I also wanted to tap into the fact that my daughter has always been a dog lover her entire life, but has more recently actually also had a service dog. And that dog has had a huge impact on her quality of life, because not least this disease can be extremely and literally isolating. She'll spend weeks in hospital where she cannot leave the room. So the only visitors she gets are wearing gloves and gowns and masks, and that's very impersonal until some years ago, enter a little black Labrador named Bella, who's a fully trained service dog, who can make her laugh, can create mayhem for the nurses, and be with her when she needs to share the quiet times and her fears. And that experience for her has been huge. And so with my veterinary background, I also wanted to incorporate a dog that has the potential to change this boy's life. The mother, Kate, is a veterinarian, but she can't face having a dog in her life. Not because she doesn't love dogs, she does, but she just can't take that one more variable that could tip her over the edge, because her life is so precariously balanced as a single mom caring for this child. Jasper the boy has this perception that because he has this disease, he feels like that must come as a trade. There must be something here. If I've been dealt this blow of this incurable illness, there's got to be some sort of shift in the universe that says, you got this, but guess what, you also got that. And that, he believes, is this ability to communicate with this dog. A dog that comes into the shelter, this beaten up, totally unadoptable geriatric old dog with scars from the past. And Jasper believes that he can feel what's going on inside this animal, and that this animal has this canine philosophy on life. And as any pet owner will tell you, that canine philosophy is very appealing because you just see it every day in the animals in your lives. They live for the moment. They're stuck in the present. They are just go, go, go. I'm going to live like it's my last day. And Jasper wants to tap into this philosophy and share it with the one person in his life who needs it the most, and that person is his mother.
Yeah, it's a compelling story, Nick. It really is, and it's deeply rooted in your own personal journey with the circumstances regarding your daughter. What is it you want people to understand about cystic fibrosis?
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, I wanted to capture the two sides of this. I wanted the reader to see how hard it is for these kids with CF, because CF is a hidden disability. I know so many examples of children and young adults with CF who will sit on a disabled chair on the subway. They'll park in a disabled space, and people will think that's appalling. So what's wrong? Because CF is one of those diseases that has its fun on the inside. You can look pretty normal on the outside, and yet you've got a third of the lung capacity of a normal human. And I wanted to show the challenges of how these kids want to be normal. You know, we live in a society that is full of social media in which everybody is showing pictures of how great their lives are. And these kids don't want the big things. They want to graduate high school. They want to drive a car. They want to, you know, share a kiss with a boy or a girl. They want to try to grow up. But this disease is trying to prevent that. And yet, despite those challenges, these kids are the bravest, strongest. They are breaking barriers. They are just living as hard as they can. And, you know, I'm constantly in awe of what my daughter is teaching me. So that was one part of what I wanted to get across. The other part was, as a parent, the challenge of trying to fit in as a parent of chronic disease. It doesn't have to be cystic fibrosis. It could be autism. It could be an older child with PTSD. It could be diabetes. There are so many chronic diseases out there, and parenting a child with chronic disease is a constant challenge because you can pretend to be normal, but you really can't be normal because this is ongoing. The fact that, you know, you get together with friends and people will naturally talk about what may be trivial events in their lives, you know, small stuff, gossip, and that's great. That's all of us will enjoy that. But if they say, "How are things for you?" and you say, "Well, you know, my child just got listed for a double lung transplant," or, you know, my kid is going to be in hospital for the next month and we don't know when we're getting out, or my child's diabetes is not in control and the doctors are worried. These are heavy, weighty, potentially day-to-day issues that parents of children with chronic disease constantly have to have in the back of their mind. And that creates a new normal, a normal where sometimes you have to keep it inside to stop yourself from screaming. And that's very challenging. I really wanted to get across that challenge in the writing. And also, one of the things that was very difficult for me as a writer was I wanted to write as a woman. I wanted to have a female voice because the truth is that the major part of caretaking for kids with chronic disease is done by mothers. And these women deserve the voice. I tried to give the best voice I could, and also they deserve an awful lot of credit for the sacrifices that they make for their children.
Absolutely, it does fall onto the woman in most cases, who is the natural caregiver. And I wanted to ask, how is your daughter? I know she's 25 now, and how is she? What's happening for her?
Well, I'm working in Boston. I currently actually commute from Cleveland. She's listed for double lung transplant and liver transplant at the Cleveland Clinic. So I find myself flying out on a Thursday night and coming back on a Sunday evening, and we sort of, sometimes we're going back and forth between Cleveland and Boston, and that is just a sort of, this is my new normal at the moment, which is, I could be getting a phone call to say she's going to go get surgery in the next few hours, or I could be waiting a year or 2 years. It's just a waiting game.
Wow. So she is listed for a transplant, but you never know when that call is going to come.
No. So, I've learned a lot about transplant surgery and transplant medicine over the last year or so, and the recipient is going to be ranked according to need and severity, whether it's heart, liver, lung, whatever, and so you are constantly revisiting where you are in that scoring scheme, and obviously there becomes this point at which your scores are getting worse and worse, your numbers are rising, and you're therefore more eligible. And then there's a point at which if your numbers rise too high, you're starting to increase your risk because you're not such a good candidate for the procedure. And so it's just another new challenge of parenting a sick child. At the moment, she's not feeling great, but she's actually doing okay. And again, it's, like I said, this is a hidden disability. You can look pretty good on the outside, and people will say that, and yet you can feel truly lousy and have the physiology to prove it.
Well, Nick, you have so much going on. So here you are. You're in practice as a veterinary surgeon. You're a best-selling author, and there's obviously now a huge demand on your time for interviews and promoting a book, which is always part of releasing a book. And you're dealing with your daughter, who's on this list for, lung and liver transplant. How do you cope? How do you manage? How do you maintain your own sanity?
I think the first, the biggest answer to that is, my wife, and that's why the dedication to her was the easiest part in the whole writing project. I dedicated the book to her and all the, selfless, what's referred to as the CF mamas everywhere. She's on a Facebook group of CF mothers, and these are special individuals. These are angelic women, and I couldn't do what I do. I mean, I do this job because I enjoy it, but also because I need to fund our lives. I need to keep our health care. And, my wife has sacrificed much of what she would have wanted to do in life to care for our daughter. And she deserves, I can only do what I do because of what she does. And, that's why, that dedication was the easiest thing I've ever done. I also would say she's also very talented at giving me fabulous material, both from some of her emotional comments about what's going on, and also some of her humor as well. So I say in the part of the acknowledgments section that if there was some really good line in the book, it's probably that my wife wrote it and I just copied it.
Right. You're deeply involved in the world of cystic fibrosis. What are the latest treatments, findings, understandings?
Yeah, so there's, unfortunately, when my daughter was diagnosed with CF at the age of 2, the gene for CF had just been discovered, and the pulmonologists, the pediatricians, were basically saying, now that we know what the gene is, we'll be able to have a cure for this disease in 5 to 10 years. Of course, a lot longer time has passed, and that cure is still not there. There's a phenomenal amount of research going on. The Cystic Fibrosis Foundation pours lots of funds into research. Boston has Vertex Pharmaceuticals that has made major strides in terms of medical options to try to enhance and combat some of the genetic effects, particularly with regard to protein formation and chloride channels and, molecular science that they've done an awful lot of, and they are making big headway on that. But they haven't reached a curative state. CRISPR is another DNA sequencing technology that holds phenomenal promise. So there's lots of things going on, but one of my greatest fears is that my daughter is going to miss the boat, that we're so close now, and yet, it may be too late for her.
Because in cystic fibrosis, there is a buildup of mucus in the lungs, right? It's part of that.
Correct. Yeah, that's the problem.
Symptoms.
It's just that we have mucus in our lungs, but it gets cleared by the lining on the inside of the lungs, and that mucus just disappears. We don't have a problem with it. In CF, mucus builds up. It's too thick and sticky, and of course what it does is provide this wonderful warm, moist environment for bacteria to thrive, and so chronic infection, inflammation, scarring is happening from the get-go.
I have a friend in Australia who is an acupuncturist. Her son was born with cystic fibrosis, and she, from the very beginning, did everything that she knew out of her Chinese medicine model, out of nutritional dietary support, and I just want to share with you that her son has been doing extremely well. He's been functioning as a normal child. He doesn't really have the disability. He doesn't have the buildup of mucus, and to me, she's such a role model and an inspiration of what really is possible. Is this an area that is being explored as well, more from an alternative healing modality?
I think the reality, one of the things, that's wonderful. Anything that works for me, fabulous. I would go with that, whatever it is. However, one of the realities of CF is the fact that there are thousands of different genetic mutations, and you can go from, there are adults in their 50s and 60s who discover they actually have cystic fibrosis. They've never had problems their entire life, and they get a workup, and suddenly, from, an asthmatic type situation or a pneumonia situation. And so those people technically have CF, but they're extremely mild. And so there's this phenomenal spectrum of, the disease that can can disable you horribly and fatally as a young child, all the way through to I didn't even know I had it. And it's also complicated by the fact that you can have two individuals with the same mutations, and clinically they can look very different. And so where that difference may come from is the impact of other genetic material on them as well. So that's part and parcel of why this disease is so hard to deal with and to treat. It so happens that some of the latest treatments will be claiming to be effective for 90% of the CF population. My daughter's mutations are not in that 90%. And so even the advances that are being made right now are not applicable to her. I was fortunate, actually. I went over to Vertex, and they were kind enough and receptive enough to let me talk about this book to them. And they were fabulous. They were, I actually spent an hour with this Fortune 500 company with some important members of staff there, just brainstorming about what we can do for the CF community, what we can do better. And that really struck me as saying, here's a company who gets it, who is not just in this for the money, it's just not just manufacturing pills. They actually care about and want to know who they are trying to help out. And so as a CF parent, they wanted to hear what I had to say. And they also owned the fact that they know they're letting some CF parents and patients down, that they can't help everyone. They're trying, and they will continue to try. But they were owning that failure, and that really impressed me.
So you've written many books from your experience as a veterinary surgeon, but this is, it seems, the first book that you're writing really from dealing with your own personal challenges as a parent.
Yeah, I would say, this is I hope, an uplifting book. This book may make you cry, but I hope it'll also make you laugh, and it will also just try to say there are many paths in life, and one way forward has the potential to be led by a four-legged friend, and be open to entertaining that notion. It may not be right for you. It may not be right for you right now, but at some point, it's worth looking into. And one of the things I convey in the book is that, we think we choose dogs, but in truth, they probably choose us. They make themselves noticeable. They make themselves receptive to us, offer that connectivity to us, and we either get it or we don't. And if we don't, then they're probably not choosing us as well.
That's such a powerful statement, because I've talked to so many people who, when I see people with their dogs, I'm always asking them questions, how they find the dog. And so many people have rescue animals, and they go to shelters. And I hear over and over again how there was just a connection, or this dog, sought them out. And there's some greater relationship that goes on, where I think we are picked on some level. We are picked. And that just comes
absolutely
around to this mystery of life, right? There's a mystery of life. There's something that happens where we connect with other beings, be it four-legged people, be other humans, that bring us a gift in life that we didn't even know existed.
Yeah, I look at, all of us probably have those moments where we say, "Why me?" And I look at these odds. Here's a guy who comes to the United States. I meet a woman and we get married. The odds of us coming together, the odds of us, neither of us, have any family history of CF, nothing in there, over generations. And we then have that 1 in 4 chance of having a child with CF, and that's what we get. And so, I write about the fact that these may not be Powerball odds, but if you think about where I started in life in a city in England, and where my wife started in a city in Massachusetts, and yet this is the path that's developed for us. And here I am talking about this subject because I've been able to write about it. And for all the challenges that my daughter endures and all the pain and suffering I see her go through, I am blessed to have her in my life, and I am so much the better for her in my life. And so, as you say, these are strange odds, and yet they have provided something meaningful and important to me, and some of which I'm trying to share in this book.
And there are experiences that transcend your own personal life. So many of the spiritual teachers that I have met say over and over again, the purpose of life is to serve. And it's so interesting how we wind up serving. Who knew that your path would lead you to have this child, and out of this experience you have written books and you have made a difference in helping other children in the CF community, and here you have, a book that is going, I'm sure, worldwide. And the message is that you are inspiring and uplifting, and in that regard, serving others in a very profound spiritual way. That's how I see it.
Yes, that's very kind of you. I haven't looked at it that deeply. I mean, I just think something inside me said, you've got something to say and you better say it. And this is, if this is helpful to, like I said, not just kids with CF or parents of CF, really kids with any chronic disease, parents of any child with chronic disease, or any parent who's just looking for a better understanding of what their friend is going through, what a family member is going through. If they're in the medical community and they want to get a sense of what's it like on the other side, it's really for that audience. And if I can reach any of them and they get some sense of this is a different reality, and yet, even given what they're going through, there are some huge positives to take from it, then I'll feel like I've succeeded, and that's all I need. Well,
I am sure you not only will accomplish that, Nick, I'm sure you have already accomplished that, and we're all the richer for it. So, I want to thank you for putting your heart and soul in a very personal way into this new book, The Wonder of Lost Causes. I really encourage everyone to read it because it's so uplifting and inspiring. And, the one last thought I want to say before we bring our conversation to an end, it's like, you bring in this lost cause dog, kind of the end of the line for this poor little animal that's been abused and it's old and has suffered so much, and yet this little being has such wisdom and has gifts to share that helps the young boy with cystic fibrosis in this relationship. And we never know where healing's going to come in our life. We never know who's going to be the giver of that healing in what form. And I think that your book reminds us that there are incredible beings in the world in whatever way. I mean, I have hawks that fly by my window. I live on the 19th floor, and I take them as messengers.
Yeah,
it's like
absolutely.
Gifts they're giving me, and so So I think it's such a heart-touching book, and I just thank you for the courage to write and share the story, and which weaves in with your own personal story and weaves in with a greater purpose that you are compelled to write. So, thank you for doing it.
Well, thank you, Cheryl, for having me on the show and this opportunity to talk about something that is very special to me. Thank you.
Yeah, it's my honor to be able to do that. So everyone, pick up a copy of The Wonder of Lost Causes. We've been talking with the author, Nick Trout. I'm sure it's found everywhere now. And Nick, thank you so much for being with us and sharing your own personal journey. It's been such a pleasure to have you on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, thank you. And to all of you listening, thank you for joining me today. You've been listening to The Love Code, and may your week be filled with love, peace, and happiness. Bye for now.